1,000. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed down 61 points at 81.82. The pound buys $1.29 and €1.18. LBC weather staying wet for central England this evening and overnight, drying up in the south, cloudy with some showers in the north and lows of 15 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:02 on Monday evening. I'm Iain Dale here with Cross Question on the panel today. To my left, Emma Revell, who is External Affairs Director of the Centre for Policy Studies. Next to her is Jake Richards, the newly elected Labour MP for Rother Valley. To my right, Lizzie Dearden, who is a freelance journalist who specialises in home affairs related issues. And next to her, Danny Kruger, the Conservative MP for East Wiltshire. They're here to answer your questions. The number to call 0345 6060 973. And as ever, you can watch us on Global Player. But if you want to text in your question on 84850, or you can WhatsApp on the phone number, you can do that as well. We'll be delighted.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to Kevin in Dartmoor. Hello, Kevin.
Good evening, Iain.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, my question to the panel is, what do they think the appeal is of Donald Trump?
Wow. Okay, Danny Kruger, does he appeal to you?
Well, he does to a degree, and I think he stands for what so many people are crying out for across the West, which is change. All the politics of the West, all of our countries in Europe and the US, have been thrown into turmoil over the last few decades. We have an economic model that doesn't work for ordinary people. We have huge cultural and technological challenges in the way we live. And Trump seems to offer, I think, it possibly is simplistic, but a very robust set of responses to those challenges. So, just like with Brexit, just like, frankly, with the election we've just had, people voted for change. They're sending a strong signal to the establishment that they're not satisfied with the status quo and they want things to be different. And he comes across as a strong leader and he offers a solution to people's challenges. So I think that's why people are responding to him, and I understand it.
Lizzie?
I suppose there's a kind of personality cult around Donald Trump that doesn't necessarily translate to the way we do politics in the UK. Danny says, he offers a story to American voters. It doesn't have to be true. It isn't necessarily true. We know a lot of it isn't true. But that seems to matter less and less. And so now we've got this kind of fight between him and Biden, so similar in so many ways, but so different in other ways. And his kind of personal charisma, potentially even more now after the assassination attempt, I think is going to be a lot kind of louder and more dominant than anything we may see coming on kind of policy.
OK. Jake Richards, I'm sure there's not much that Donald Trump says that appeals to you, but can you understand his appeal to certain demographics in the US?
Absolutely. And I agree with a lot of what Danny said. The world is increasingly complex. We have huge challenges that are affecting our economy in terms of immigration, in terms of technology. And what Donald Trump offers is simple solutions to complex problems. The problem with that is that these complex problems cannot be solved simply. And it is the challenge for all politicians on both sides of the Atlantic to explain how we can change people's lives, how we can improve their communities, but also say that this is difficult. This is difficult stuff. And I agree that with Danny as well. The last general election that 10 days ago, Labour won because people wanted change. But I think Labour are also very honest with the electorate by saying this is not easy. This is going to take time. We've been calling for a decade of national renewal. And that's the difference between populism and populists like Trump, who say they can build a wall, stop immigration, everything's going to be sorted, and sensible grown-up politics. And that's a battle that will continue. Just because we won the general election this month doesn't mean that we still have to keep making that argument that these are complex problems that require complex solutions.
How do you account for the fact that he appeals to some groups in American society that you just wouldn't think he would do, like black voters, for example, Latino voters? He seems to be doing really well, not among women voters, though, which I suspect we can all come up with the reasons for that.
Well, I don't think that we should ever be making lazy assumptions about demographics. Our politics is much more complex now. The public are much more volatile. We have hyperlocal, fragmented politics. If we look at the general election we've just had, the analysis hasn't actually been done vigorously yet. But if you look very carefully, we're seeing a very, very volatile electorate with hyperlocal issues affecting different constituencies, demographics voting how you might not suspect they would. So I think any lazy assumptions, assuming that some part of the public and the population will vote one way or another, or like one thing and won't like another, is lazy. And that's why politicians now have to work much, much harder than they ever have to understand the public they seek to serve. I think Labour did a good job of doing that before the general election, but that work has only just started in government, and we've got to continue doing that over the next 5 years.
Emma Revell.
I think what people like about Donald Trump is he's not a politician. That was true, before he ran to be president the first time. Even having had 4 years in the White House, it's still true. He is a businessman, not necessarily a very good one on a number of scales, but he's also an entertainment personality, and that is what I think his skills lie. He's very good at presenting, he's very good at persuading people, and as you say, what is, I think, interesting about him is that even if you look at where you would think he didn't appeal to people, so religious voters in the US, particularly on the right, wouldn't necessarily go for a man with a couple of ex-wives, a lot of accusations of affairs, for example, and yet he is able to persuade those voters because he can put forward a narrative that is persuasive. And I think it is, at the end of the day, like Jake says, he's offering simplistic answers, and if you feel like politics hasn't delivered for you, it's been too complicated, you haven't benefited, why not go for the businessman, the showman who tells you that it can all be better?
Can I just add, though, it's not just about showmanship, although he's got that, but that's one of the attributes of leadership, and I think actually that's what people see in him. You might not like the way he wants to lead or the direction he's going to lead the country, but he clearly demonstrates that essential quality of courage, conviction. We can say it's just simplistic, but actually there's a clarity of vision about him. He believes in his country and he communicates that belief really persuasively. And he's strong. And those are the qualities that we do look for in our leaders. And I take Jake's point about the complexity of modern life and of politics, but sometimes, and none of our parties really had a complicated message at the election we just had, yours included, Jake. So politicians do have to speak in plain terms. We have to speak and use primary colours to communicate our vision. I think Trump does that extremely well. And if he's going to win, I think it'll be because he's managed to communicate an idea of his country that he himself embodies. And that's another great quality of leadership, that they seem to sort of embody their own country successfully to the public. That's what we're looking for, and that's why he's successful.
Isn't also one of the secrets of successful politics to build a broad coalition? And, I mean, we don't know who he's picking as his vice president yet, but it looks as if it might be J.D. Vance, who is a sort of hardline supporter of Trump. That's not reaching out to other people. And yet we always preach in this country the value of having a sort of broad tent, because that parties win elections when they have broad coalitions.
I sense you're interested in the Conservative Party's future there.
Well, we might have a question on that later, so let's not...
Okay. No, fair point. No, I agree, and that is, ultimately you do have to govern for the whole nation, but you also have to have clarity. And when in a divided country, I don't think it's enough to split the difference and just say, I'm going to be half of this and half of the other. You've got to be clear about your own vision. But yes, you hope that when they win, they will vote, they will govern for everyone.
This is a danger of turning into a Trump love in a bit. I mean, look, he's made an electoral calculation.
Stop that, I can assure you.
He's made an electoral calculation that actually, instead of having to unify the country, he can win by dividing it even more. And his politics is of division. It is of setting one side against another. And he knows under the electoral system in America, he can win by doing that, because he did in 2016, and he can do so again. In our system, you do have to reach and build broader coalitions, and that's what Labour Party did.
Well, breaking news, Donald Trump has just posted on his social media platform Truth Social, I've decided that the person best suited to assume the position of Vice President of the United States is Senator J.D. Vance of the great state of Ohio. I have to say, I don't know much about him, apart from the fact that he's quite hardline and a great supporter.
An amazing book. Yeah. All about post-industrial, forgive me, Danny might know parts of America and
the Appalachians,
and so he's a very interesting figure.
I've met him. He's a clever guy. Did very well from a very poor background. Ended up I don't think he worked in finance, so he's sort of ended up with a very professional career. But then wrote this book about his own background, and in a sense, he speaks for that America that was left behind by deindustrialisation, by globalisation.
Hillbilly Elegy is the book.
That's right. And I think he speaks to the modern era quite persuasively. I mean, you might be right in that he doesn't represent the full breadth of the country that he and Trump need to win over, so there'll be a political challenge there. But I think he's quite a sophisticated character, Vance, and
interesting.
I think he has,
Russia,
and he has I think a quite developed economic vision.
Well, I think he's similar to perhaps Nigel Farage, has expressed admiration for leaders in Russia in the past.
Oh dear,
we'll see about that.
How to bring down the atmosphere in the studio, Jake. Well done. Right, let's take a follow-up text question from Marissa in Stamford Hill. While we're talking about volatility in violence in America, what can we do about the threats and intimidation being used in our politics here? Well, of course, today the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has established a Defending Democracy task force at the Home Office in response to the intimidation faced by some candidates by their political rivals and their campaigners during the general election. The government's independent advisor on political violence, Lord Walney, warned Yvette Cooper last week that the possibility of an assassination attempt against a politician in this country is growing because of the toxicity of public debate. Now, Lizzie, I think you've written about this, so do you want to kick off?
Yeah, unfortunately, this kind of thing's a bit of a speciality, but the Defending Democracy Task Force is actually something that was set up by the last government. But what they're doing is kind of have a meeting of that next week, reviewing what's going on and separately reviewing what happened at this election. Because although the kind of full statistics and investigations haven't been concluded yet, there does seem to have been an unprecedentedly high level of abuse, harassment, and kind of personal actions directed at MPs in a way that obviously people think they shouldn't be. And in terms of the kind of very direct physical threat, not only have we had the murder of David Amis, Joe Cox, the attempted assassination of Stephen Timms, but actually there have been a number of terror plots foiled recently that also did target MPs. And the pattern that we're seeing is that although some people do have very individual grievances with MPs, basically they're being used as a kind of lightning rod for wider issues. So people appear to be going after MPs, not because of anything that MP particularly individually might have done, but because they're a symbol of a wider grievance that the person has, whether it's to do with Israel and Palestine, whether it's to do with migration. And that's a trend that's been building for a number of years and now really seems to be hitting a peak.
Jake, did you have any of this in the election campaign?
No, look, I had a vigorous election campaign. I don't want to complain at all, but I'm very aware of colleagues who've had a very, very difficult time over the 6-week short campaign and before. And I know Lizzie's done some work on this before, but actually it's a part of our politics that the media haven't paid enough attention to. In particular, Jonathan Ashworth's campaign. During the campaign, we could all see the scenes that he was suffering, but it wasn't really a news story. There was a Twitter storm at one point because he put a video of him standing up to some of the people who were harassing him. This should have been a news story. This was a big deal.
I think it was.
Well, we should have got more attention. I'm pleased that the Home Secretary's announced this task force on continuing the work that perhaps was previously underway in any event. What I would say is social media doesn't help, and I know, Iain, you've written books about this, but social media certainly doesn't help. During the election campaign, I was stopping in a cafe in my constituency and ended up having a lovely chat with a woman who was not voting for me. Very pleasant. I soon realised I recognised her because her profile picture was a Facebook account who was giving me endless abuse on Facebook, and proper abuse. And I said to her, I recognise you. We've had a robust discussion on Facebook. She said, "Oh, sorry about that. That's just Facebook." And it's fascinating because she was a lovely woman, and we exchanged views, and we've got on, and we now get on, and she doesn't be rude to me on Facebook anymore. So it's just an interesting insight into it. But look, I'm very lucky. I'm a white, increasingly middle-aged man.
Not middle-aged. How old are you?
35. But so I know that female colleagues in particular get it much worse than me, and I'm very aware of that as well.
Emma?
Yeah, I think what is important for this review, I think, is to come to some quite specific points about the type of abuse, where it's coming from and who it's directed towards, because I think it was right for Yvette Cooper today to talk about, it's not just one type of abuse or abuse against one MPs of one party. It is about what everyone experienced, but I think what you will find is that it is much more prominent, specifically against Labour women who have spoken out a bit against this, as have Conservative female MPs and candidates. There is a very gendered element to this kind of thing, and I think, MPs like Jess Phillips, for example, in her speech when she won a week or so ago, said, you might want me to shut up, I'm not going to. But that is an element of this that I hope the review will touch on.
Danny?
Well, I agree. It's a very interesting story from Jake about the way that people are much more human face to face, and I have that experience as well. And you do get the most appalling things said about you online, and in fact written directly to your emails. You'll be getting used to that, Jake.
Don't worry.
And of course, it's your staff who deal with that, because I don't see abusive emails mostly unless they really think that there's some danger involved. So it's your staff who are picking that up. I do think we have obviously a toxic online culture. And so I endorse what's happening and everything that's been said. Just to add a different perspective, though, I do worry a bit about the politics potentially of a defending democracy agenda, because we do need a robust democracy in which people say things that are rude to each other. And we've always had it, and it was always the marvel of this country historically. Other countries, people from other countries couldn't believe what the public were allowed to say to and about politicians in this country, with our free press and our tradition of very kind of robust exchange at public meetings. And I worry a bit that we're going to start clamping down on any exchange that might be offensive to politicians or indeed to groups in our public. And if we start policing language, and the other great threat, I think, is a panic about misinformation or disinformation, which again is a real issue. But again, if we empower the state to decide what can and can't be said, whether it's online or in person, there are other dangers that emerge. So we should not assume that the only danger that we have here is the hurt that can be caused, or indeed the threats. Obviously, we've got to do what we can to eliminate physical violence, but let's not clamp down too hard on free speech, because we create all sorts of other problems that way.
Well, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, has been visiting Israel today, so we'll have a question on that next. I don't know what consensus there will be on that subject, but we'll soon find out. It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Reply.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
90 minutes past 8 on LBC. Danny Kruger is here, Conservative MP for East Wiltshire. Were you ever in any doubt, Danny, that you would be returned in the election?
Yes, I was in a lot of doubt and anxiety. It was a very stressful time. And on the night itself, for the first few hours, we were really worried because the way they empty the ballot boxes onto the table. The first boxes that were open all came from these towns which seemed to be all voting reform, and we just hadn't picked that up. So it's a real lesson to me in not trusting your own experience.
Yours is a new constituency, isn't it?
New constituency, but in fact it was the towns that I'd represented before that were voting reform, which is a terrible indictment of me. So that tells you what they think of me. But army towns, and really. So I mean, I won in the end with a healthy majority, just under 5,000. But still, yes, I never took it for granted. My party really screwed up. Both during the campaign, but I'm afraid to say historically, and policy failures. So I'm not surprised that so many people were really, really disenchanted with us, and that so many went to other way. I mean, Jake's point about them winning the election is fair enough. You guys did win the election numerically, and there's a number of seats you've won. There's no doubt about that. However, the fact is, in votes, you didn't win, we lost. We just sacrificed huge numbers of voters to either to stay at home, people not voting at all, or go into reform. And, that happened in my patch as well. And it's a massive lesson about not sacrificing your base like we did.
And Jake Richards, you won your seat from the Conservatives. It was always seen as a marginal seat. Were you ever in any doubt that you would win?
Yes. Look, like Danny, I think any candidate, and you've been a candidate, you know that you never take anything for granted either way. And we had to fight for every vote. And whilst we did win the election, we've won a big, healthy majority. I think the Labour Party are very...
Show off. What is it?
No. The Labour Party have won a healthy majority.
Oh, I thought you meant your seat.
No, across the board, Labour know that, and to quote Boris Johnson, I won't be doing this often, whilst the victory was a mile wide, it is thin. We appreciate that we didn't win a huge chunk of the popular vote. We have to take that into account. And that is why we've got a mandate, yes, to deliver, but we've got to deliver. And if we don't, we know very much we'll be out next time.
Revell is here from the Centre for Policy Studies, and Lizzie Dearden, freelance journalist. Right, let's move on to Danny in Barnet. Hello, Danny.
Hello, good evening. I have a couple of simple questions to ask. David Lammy has just gone off to the Middle East to speak in Israel and the West Bank and to other people. He's demanding a ceasefire. He's saying that they're going to recognise a Palestinian state early. He wants a two-state solution. Do any of you have any idea how a two-state solution is going to work? And what gain is there going to be declaring a Palestinian state before there's any peace? Won't it just put people's backs up to the wall and nothing's going to happen from it?
Now, Labour proposed formally recognising a Palestinian state in its manifesto, while the UK's permanent representative to the UN said on Friday that David Lammy is also considering resuming funding for the UN's Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, or UNRWA, after Rishi Sunak's government cut off funding for it over claims its workers were involved in the 7th of October terror attack. Quite a baptism of fire. I don't think this is actually David Lammy's first foreign visit. I think he's went to Stockholm, didn't he, last week? But I imagine that he's got an interesting reception from the Israeli government.
Yeah, look, it's not easy. And David Lammy, he visited Europe, Berlin and Stockholm as his first visit, but it's very important that this was soon after. Britain has to play its role in trying to bring about a cessation of the violence, and also, in the medium term, a two-state solution. Now, that does look very distant. There's no point beating about the bush, but there is no way out of this. There isn't a two-state solution. So it's not like this is a pipe dream. It's the only way in which you can have peace in that part of the world is by having a sovereign Palestinian state free of interference, and in Israel, which is again free from the terrorism that has blighted it for too long. Now that does feel like a long way away, but Labour, I think, are going to be pushing this as much as they can. And I'm pleased that David Lammy's out there. I'm pleased that he's speaking to both sides. And that's what a foreign secretary should be doing.
Do you not think that he should, or the government should declare a Palestinian state like the Norwegians have done, like the Irish have done? Because at the moment it's a bit of a wishy-washy commitment, isn't it? Saying, well, yes, we do want to see one, but we're not going to say so yet.
Well, diplomacy is not easy. And I think if David Lammy had got this job and said, right, we're going to declare this, we're going to declare that, let's have these conversations. Let's go to them. It's right that the Foreign Secretary is meeting with the most senior officials on both sides of this horrific war that's happening, and let's take this slowly and carefully and methodically. Let's not rush into big statements that could come back to haunt us down the line. And I think that David Lammy is doing the right thing by treading carefully on this.
Emma?
I mean, you said there the current position could be described as wishy-washy. I think it has to be. I don't think it's our place to decide for Israel and Palestine what a solution looks like. I think Britain's role in this is to encourage, to support, but at the end of the day, they're the parties who need to come together and agree on this. And, as Jake said, that seems incredibly far away, but I think it always has to be the end goal, because, we can't decide for them.
No, but David Lammy has called for a ceasefire today. If he can do that, why can't he recognise a Palestinian state? That's what a lot of people will be saying.
I assume that the Foreign Office are reluctant to get into conversations about a Palestinian state, because the follow-up questions are, where should that sit on the map? What are the borders of a Palestinian state? And that's not for Britain to decide. So I guess that would explain some of the reluctance.
Lizzie.
Yeah, I think the UK position on a two-state solution has been kind of all words and no action for many, many years. And what's happened is sort of worse than doing nothing, which is that in doing nothing, the UK's allowed and not really opposed effectively the spread of ever-increasing settlement building and other activity in the occupied West Bank, which makes a two-state solution very difficult, if not impossible, because the demographic of the occupied Palestinian territories has been completely changed. And when, like we've said, it's not necessarily for the UK to decide where those borders are. But if you look at the map now, what was once a fairly clearly delineated thing is no longer there. And so, obviously there's a commitment to it, but what the UK can actually do, I'm really not sure.
Annie?
Yeah, well said. I think the two-state solution might be a attractive ideal. It's a sort of abstract solution, but I think it's impossible to call it into being simply by recognising it. I'm afraid I think that's not to be rude to the Irish and the Norwegians, but I don't think that's the actions of a serious, responsible government that actually has a role to play in the Middle East, as the UK does. I don't think it's the right thing to do at this stage. The question is not just what are the borders of the Palestinian state, but who is the Palestinian state? What agency are you recognising as the government of Palestine? Is it Hamas in Gaza? Is it the totally discredited Palestinian Authority in the West Bank? Who do you deal with? So I'm afraid I don't think it's appropriate to be recognising this non-existent entity at this point. What the role of the UK should be, in my view, is to, as we've discussed, try and help with other partners to broker meaningful peace talks, and that has to be an exchange of hostages for peace. That is the only way this immediate conflict is going to be settled. I think we could also be doing more, and I'm pleased to see the Foreign Secretary has been emphasising this, to support the access to British aid and international aid into Gaza, which obviously is problematic. I'm not sure we should be financing UNRWA again, given its complicity, the complicity of some of its workers apparently in the terror attacks. I think that's again a discredited organisation for now at least. So there's a lot of practical work we can be doing on the ground, but I don't think just frankly, I'm afraid to say, a sort of naive way, imagining the goal of peace and declaring it by recognising a non-existent entity is the action of a responsible government.
How do you think that meeting between Netanyahu and Lamy will go? Because I can't see much of a meeting of the minds there.
No, I don't know what Lamy's been saying about Netanyahu, but saying based on what he says about Trump, he doesn't hold back on his what he thinks about international politicians he disagrees with. We have a challenge in our relations with certain countries around the world, given where Labour have been. I think they are taking a responsible position so far on this issue, and not calling immediately for recognition. I think the ceasefire is, again, calling for a ceasefire. Well, we all believe in that. Listen, I hope that they are going to have a meaningful discussion. I have confidence in the goodwill of David Lammy, and he will understand the importance of representing this country well in its important partnerships internationally. And I hope that the Israeli government, for their part, see us as an ally, which is what we should be in the region, and heed our calls particularly for more aid.
OK, we will move on to a different subject in a moment. Danny, thank you very much for that question. Great discussion. It's coming up to 8:30. News headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
Donald Trump has become the Republican nominee for president after enough votes were cast at the National Convention to secure his bid. Delegates from 29 more states are still casting their votes, but the former president has passed the threshold to win. The former president's also named Ohio Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate for the presidential election. Spanish authorities say they're confident human remains found on the island of Tenerife for missing British teenager Jay Slater. The 19-year-old disappeared nearly a month ago. And the Home Office is launching a rapid review into the treatment of candidates, campaigners and volunteers during the general election. It comes after increasing reports of intimidation, harassment and abuse in the lead-up to July the 4th. LBC weather staying wet for central England this evening and overnight, drying up in the south, cloudy with some showers in the north and lows of 15 degrees.
LBC.
and beyond.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:32. We have Danny Kruger, the Conservative MP, with us. Jake Richards, New Labour MP. Well, if I say New Labour, a lot of people think I mean New Labour
New Britain.
or New Labour from Rother Valley. I've just got your majority. It's actually 998. Yeah. That's quite close, isn't it? That's
what I meant. Yeah.
So no doubt you want Keir Starmer to deliver.
We've got to deliver, and Keir's got to deliver. No. But on a serious note, Ian, you look across the country and the there are no safe seats. There are no safe Labour seats. There are no safe Conservative seats anymore. That is the new democracy we have, and it shows both the volatility of the electorate, but also why it's so important that we've got to deliver.
Dan goes any argument for PR, I would say, but let's not even go there.
Not go there.
Emma Revell is External Affairs Director of the Centre for Policy Studies. Lizzie Dearden is a freelance journalist specialising in home affairs. And Danny Kruger, Conservative MP for East Wiltshire. Right, a WhatsApp question from Barry in Wiltshire. What's more important, an historical site or building better infrastructure, i.e. Stonehenge on the A303 tunnel underneath it? Now, I think your constituency includes Stonehenge.
It does, yes, it does. So I have that pleasure of grappling with this policy challenge. I mean, the arguments for the Stonehenge tunnel are actually very finely balanced. There's a huge problem with traffic in the villages along it. People trying to get to the southwest get snarled up because it's a single lane.
I know it well.
Everybody knows it well, and yet, the government, the last government, Conservative government, pledged to do this and said it would cost £1.8 billion to dig a tunnel under the historic. Under the World Heritage Site. It's probably going to be a lot more than that. So I'm afraid I'm not yet supporting the proposal until we have much greater clarity on the cost, the timescale, the impact on local people. But we do need to invest in the traffic problems in that area. And I hope we haven't heard what the new government's going to do about it because spades are not in the ground yet. They might decide to cancel the project. But I do think we need greater clarity on what the real cost is going to be to the taxpayer and to the community.
Surely if you have a tunnel underneath it, that is better for the environment, because if you don't have a tunnel, presumably the single track road is going to have to be upgraded in some form.
Yeah, so indeed. So it's the archaeology that's the issue. So putting a dual carriageway on the surface, which seems like the obvious thing to do, although it's quite ugly, would involve more damage because the archaeology is quite shallow. So digging a much deeper tunnel, it needs to be much longer if it's to protect the archaeology. And it just costs a massive fortune. I mean, might be up to £3 billion. I mean, that's money we could really use, I think, for defence most of all. I represent a lot of soldiers in Wiltshire. We're a Salisbury Plain, right by the Stonehenge. I think that money could be used for our armed forces. But, we've got to do something about the traffic.
Lizzie.
Oof, not strong views, I'm afraid, but I've got family in that neck of the woods, and I guess the only thing I would say is that I think the reason that road's so clogged is that the public transport's shocking. If you're trying to go west, that's just the road you end up on. Like, the amount of times I've ended up looking at Stonehenge and I'm like, why am I here? I don't mean to be here, but it seems to be the only road. You just always end up on it.
Please use the M4 in future.
Okay.
Maybe that's what's ended up there in the first place.
Yeah, maybe they're just like, oh, for God's sake, we're here again. That's not a helpful view.
Emma.
I think so much of this country is held back, not only, by considering infrastructure versus historical sites, it's infrastructure versus environment, infrastructure versus, local consent. We are bad at infrastructure for a whole host of different reasons, and it's holding back economic growth enormously, whether that's, infrastructure like roads.
But this argument about Stonehenge has been going on for decades, hasn't it? Which rather illustrates your point.
Lots of other arguments about lots of other infrastructure also drag on. And as Danny said, there's not even a spade in the ground. And we've been talking about this for years and years. So I think, setting aside this specific example, which I don't know a lot about, having never even been to Stonehenge, unfortunately, although it's on the list, I might just drive past it. It might be quicker. I think
actually it wouldn't be.
The traffic's so slow, you get a good view.
I get a really good look as I sat in traffic. Okay, I'll factor that in. The new government really needs to get a grip on what we do about infrastructure planning, of any type in any place, because it is something that we as a country are incredibly bad at, and it's really damaging the economy.
But Jake, isn't this a good illustration of all the arguments that we've had about reforming planning? Because if we were in China now, the government would just say, OK, well, we're going to build a tunnel. Don't care what anybody thinks, we're going to do it. And that's why they are so streets ahead of us in so many infrastructure developments. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should emulate China, But there is a balance to be struck. And I'm not sure that some of your colleagues quite get how difficult it is going to be to reform the planning system.
Well, I think they're going to have to quite quickly. Rachel Reeves has made it abundantly clear, both before the election and in the 10 days since, that planning reform is going to be right at the heart of what this Labour government does. And I think we'll be hearing a lot more about that on Wednesday in the King's speech. We've got to get... The only way out of so many of our country's problems is by getting the economy growing. And the best way, one of the most effective ways of doing that, is by getting Britain building again, getting infrastructure, the technologies of the future, the jobs of the future. And that is going to be difficult, and I'm not pretending for a minute that's going to be easy, and that's going to mean some difficult decisions for colleagues in terms of their local constituency, and sometimes you're going to have to be unpopular, but that's politics. And I think that that's going to be a big test for this Labour government and the Labour Party in general, but one that I think we're ready for.
But with a majority of 998, if you... I don't
need to keep reminding me, Ian.
I think I do. If you're in a marginal seat, and there's some big planning application that the majority of your constituents are against, there's a huge pressure on you to conform to the wishes of your constituents.
Absolutely, but that's the role of an MP in general, right? So sometimes you're going to have to take on your constituents. You're not there as a delegate, you're there as a representative. You're there as a member of parliament to represent your constituency, and that's what I'm proud to do. But equally, you've got to vote what you think is right for the country as well. But look, I'm not pretending this is easy, and there are no doubt there are planning applications in my constituency that I won't like, and I will be having to engage with the local people on that as well as voting on legislation as it passes through Parliament that affect the country. These are difficult issues. There's a tension there between being a local representative and a parliamentarian, and that's one that we're going to have to navigate carefully. But look, as I keep saying, over the next 5 years, Labour will only succeed if we get the economy growing, and that has to be, planning reform has to be at the heart of that, and will be at the heart of it.
Right, let's go to Joe in Leeds. Hi, Joe.
Hello there, Ian. Thanks very much for taking my call.
What would you like to ask?
My question is really around IR35 and whether, any of the Tory government would reconsider, going back to what we used to have before, or whether Labour would, because basically we're losing an awful lot of opportunity to, especially in things like IT and other service sectors, to companies who onshore people, which is fine, which is great. We bring a lot of talent into the country, which is really welcome. But it's an unlevel playing field in that a lot of UK-based self-employed entrepreneurs are basically hamstrung by our own government in terms of trying to compete. And, in terms of, not everybody may be well suited to a corporate type structure. They may be self-employed and like the flexibility. But yet our government, especially the Tory government recently, has really just literally hamstrung us and made us uncompetitive. Why is the government more interested in helping Mr. Modi create his middle class and punish British workers? That's what I'm really interested in.
OK, we'll get our panel's views in a moment, but just to give a little bit of context for our listeners, the government is expected to announce plans to reform employment statuses in Wednesday's King's speech to provide more rights to those who suffer the drawbacks of being self-employed, fewer rights without the tax-based benefits of it. Labour is also expected to increase the enforcement of the IR35 tax regulation for self-employed people. Now, this is quite a complicated subject in many ways, but it's of great interest to many of our listeners who are subject to IR35, and if Sheila Fogarty was here, she would be waxing lyrical about it. Jay Richards, let's start with you.
Well, you're right. It is an issue that comes up an awful lot on the doorstep, as they say. People have felt hamstrung, as your caller said. I think that we have to update employment law to keep up with the modern labour force, and I don't think that's been done over the last 14 years under the Conservatives. As you've said, Ian, I expect announcements on this on the King's speech from Wednesday, and we'll see exactly what the government propose. But it's right that we should not be holding back people from self-employment. Self-employed people increasingly are part of the growth that I was talking about. They're the entrepreneurs of the future. They're the people who are starting new businesses. And so we need to support them in any way we can. And I expect this government to do that over the next few weeks and months.
Emma?
I think IR35 is one example of the complexity of the tax system. There are an almost incomprehensible number of complexities within it as the tax system has grown. I think what I hope the Labour government will do is seek to simplify rather than complicate. I think, the more we try and fiddle at the edges and smooth out, actually you introduce new cliff edges, new complexities. If you look at, the VAT registration threshold, for example, for small businesses, there's a phenomenal clumping of businesses just below that threshold, because as soon as you pass it, it becomes incredibly complicated and burdensome to deal with the paperwork of being registered for VAT. So we need to look at simplification, I think, in ways that can be beneficial for self-employed people in particular, because as Jake says, I can't remember the last time I spoke to a Conservative MP who didn't say, this is something that is brought up constantly by constituents. So it's affecting, all MPs and all constituencies. But I think we need to focus on a simpler tax system rather than just trying to fix individual problems, introducing small tweaks that down the line just make things worse.
And it's not just IR35, is it, Danny? The loan charge is another aspect of this.
Yeah. So these things come up a lot, and it's fair to say that the complexity of the tax system has risen in our time in government. It rose before that. It always rises, even under Thatcher and Nigel Lawson. The attempt by the Treasury to accommodate the complexity of the modern economy just ends with a more and more complicated tax code. So I would love to see, and I really, I don't really believe it'll happen, but I'm, going to suspend my cynicism and hope that Labour are going to manage to crack this challenge that no one has cracked before, because it's absolutely imperative that we make it easier for people to run small businesses. And we, in our manifesto, pledged to take the self-employed out of national insurance. We pledged to raise the VAT threshold. There are things that can be done. I don't think Labour will do it because they have a crisis of how to fund their public service, their public spending commitments. They're going to be looking for all the tax they can raise. And I'm afraid loan charge IR35, yes, I hope they'll do something to make it easier for small businesses, but I fear it won't happen, and the complexity is just going to continue.
Lizzie?
This is something I'll freely admit to knowing nothing about, but I'm now quite terrified of my first ever self-employed tax return, which I'll be doing soon. So, going to read up on that. Yeah,
I think you should get an accountant. That's my advice. Right, we will come on to more questions in just a moment here on Cross Question. It's 8:45.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Danny Kruger, Jake Richards, Lizzie Dearden and Emma Revell with us answering your questions. Here's a text question from Olivia in Camden. Have Labour just completely abandoned trans people now? Now, the new Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, wrote on Twitter yesterday to confirm he will go ahead with the total ban on puberty blockers put forward by his Conservative predecessor, Victoria Atkins, saying the recent CAS review into transgender services showed there isn't yet enough evidence on their effects. However, a number of Labour MPs have expressed concern that the party isn't providing access to healthcare for trans people if this ban goes ahead. Lizzie.
Yeah, this is way off my base, but obviously I think just a point on the difficulty of the timing of the CAS review. Obviously it was something that the Conservatives triggered, but then Labour have been sort of left with the choice whether to implement its recommendations, and I think that's put the government in a very difficult position because obviously the review itself was kind of apolitical, and so...
And Labour did welcome the conclusions of the CAS review.
They did, and I think now, who knows, they're going to be faced with some really difficult choices, and I think it's clear that whatever decision is made now, whether it's a kind of continuity approach based off that review or something different, it's something that people feel so deeply about that I think whatever, Wes Streeting does, there would be a huge backlash, and there probably will be.
Danny Kruger.
Well, I think I would commend Wes Streeting for taking a really decent, principled, responsible position on this. He's absolutely right. I mean, the simple fact is that we should not be prescribing life-changing and, physiologically unnecessary drugs or medical treatments to children. I'm afraid it is as straightforward as that. And the CAS review demonstrates the evidence of why it's so wrong. So absolutely the government shouldn't be doing this. My concern is at the same time we're likely to hear in the King's Speech or maybe in other legislation that they're going to press ahead with what they call a trans-inclusive ban on conversion therapy. And I'm worried that sends the opposite signal because what they're going to be doing there is criminalising any therapeutic support for gender questioning young people that isn't affirming their desire to transition. So while it's good that they're going to be stopping the medical treatment and the prescription of puberty blockers, they're going to be stopping the therapeutic support that young people need to come to the right decision for themselves about their gender. And I'm worried that they're going to be throwing a bit of a stop to the trans lobby through the conversion therapy bill, which I think could be very, very damaging to childhood as well.
Jake?
Well, I disagree with Danny on the conversion therapy bill, but going back to the central issue here, I think we need to recognise what the CAS review said and what Wes Streeting has announced today. The NHS have already made a decision regarding puberty blockers at the moment. The CAS review has made recommendations regarding the puberty blockers at the moment. And Wes Streeting, as the Health Secretary now, is just making sure that government policy is consistent in the private sector as well as the NHS. That seems to me to be the only rational step that any responsible health secretary could take, prioritising children's safety first. But what we're also saying as a government, which is absolutely critical, is this is just one part of treatment for people with gender dysmorphia. This isn't it, and we want to ensure that the NHS offers treatment for any young person who is grappling with gender dysmorphia.
But not a talking therapy that could make be genuinely open about what their dysphoria might be.
Conversion therapy, as far as I understand it, is very different to just the talking therapy for those with gender dysmorphia. And in fact, many on your benches support a ban as well. Yes, and there's a big split in the Conservative Party coming on this. So I think we just need to be very careful as to what conversion. You may know more about this than me, but conversion therapy is a broad spectrum. Yeah. And I think the bill that we will see this week trying to ban that goes against some quite significant, in my view anyway, malpractice in that area that seeks to ban it. I understand there are legitimate concerns, but I don't think it's fair to criticise the bill just yet.
Emma?
I think it's not about abandoning trans people, it's about protecting children. I think that would be the position that both CAS and Streeting would take. I think what the CAS review also found is that there was a disproportionately high number of young girls who, if not had an official diagnosis of autism, certainly would probably get one if they tried to. And actually there were significant concerns that there were, misunderstanding symptoms of autism and not helping young girls come to terms with that diagnosis that was being misinterpreted as questioning their gender. And it's about protecting those children. I think it's important that the NHS does offer, alternatives for people who believe that, their assigned gender is not how they truly feel. We shouldn't abandon trans people or anyone who thinks they may be trans, but we should not even come close to risking the health of children who are not trans but are questioning their gender for other reasons.
OK, thank you very much for that. Let's go to a text question from David in Solihull. New stats show immigration made the population rocket last year. How can the new government tackle this problem? And is it a problem? Lizzie?
They're actually inheriting falling immigration. It's obviously falling from a massive peak. But the very early indications are that the changes the Conservatives made to certain kinds of visas, spousal visas and dependent visas, those are already having an effect. So the numbers are going to come down, and they're coming down from such a high peak. That doesn't take that much effort. And at the moment, I think Labour's position is kind of continue the situation we've got, maybe have some kind of review down the line. So I think we haven't really seen yet, beyond some kind of slightly vague talk about net migration coming down, we haven't really seen how far Labour's going to go with that and what policies they may want to introduce.
Emma?
I think it is a problem, one, because we don't have the infrastructure to cope. I think even if you are quite lax on immigration, in principle, you think immigration is a good thing and we should have more of it. If we don't have the housing, the school places, the GP surgeries to cope with it, then it can significantly, undermine public support for immigration. I think also you have to acknowledge that the public has voted for the last 20 years or so for parties that have unfailingly promised in their manifestos and in their election campaigns to get migration under control, to bring net migration down, whether they've given a specific figure like, migration in the tens of thousands. And that has not happened. We have seen migration ticking up, in an almost never-ending fashion. And I think that is significantly damaging to public confidence in politics. Whether you back increasing immigration or not, if the public have been telling you for 2 decades, we want less, politicians have said, we will give you less, and you've just got, net migration of over 500,000, it's no wonder the public don't trust what politicians say anymore.
Just to give a bit of statistical background to this, new figures from the ONS show the population of England and Wales increased by almost 610,000 between mid-2022 and mid-2023, with the ONS saying immigration was by far the biggest contribution to this increase in the population. The new figures also showed a declining birth rate and a growing death rate. In fact, I think if my memory serves me correctly, there were 598,200 people born last year and 598,400 people who died last year, which is a bit of a coincidence, I suppose. Jake, what can the government do about this? Because as Lizzie says, net immigration is going to fall this year and indeed next year. So maybe you've been quite lucky in coming into office at this time.
Well, Labour, going into the general election, committed to bring down levels of migration over the course of the Parliament. The way to do that in terms of legal migration is changing the economy. So at the moment, large swathes of our economy is far too reliant upon cheap foreign labour from abroad, and that needs to change. And one of the things, again, I expect to see in the King's speech is reforms to the social care system, which will have a massive effect over time, because no one's saying this is easy and no one's saying this is going to happen quickly, but over time will have an effect on those immigration levels as well. There's also the separate issue of illegal migration and what we are seeing on an almost daily basis with boats crossing the Channel. And again, Labour are taking a different approach, and we've announced policies within the first 24 hours of coming into government to try and grapple with that problem. But again, going to what we mentioned at the beginning of this this show, Iain, is that these are not easy problems to solve. And Conservative governments over the last 14 years in every general election committed to bringing down levels of legal migration, to cancelling illegal migration. They've come up with lots of different numbers, lots of different policies, and it's gone up and up and up and up and up. And so, I think a good starting point from this is that this is a complex issue. It's going to take time to have sustainable levels of migration again, and it's going to take time to grapple with illegal migration. But we've got a government now that is concentrating on practical policies rather than gimmicks, and that's a start.
Danny?
Well, just let me come to the small boats in a second. I just want to say I completely agree with Jake's analysis of the problem on legal migration, the reason we have so many people coming to this country, and it's 600,000 net, it's over 1 million people gross coming in, then you minus the people who emigrate. So huge numbers are arriving here to fill the gaps in our workforce, and of course their dependents coming as well. So we have a chronic problem, and Emma's totally right, it is a real issue. High migration depresses productivity, it inhibits growth, it depresses wages, and it puts huge and unsustainable pressure on housing and public services. So the public are absolutely right to demand it reduces, and Emma's right, we have failed, Labour failed, migration continues to rise inexorably. It's coming down now because the very generous humanitarian visa scheme that we awarded after Ukraine and to Hong Kongers is tailing off. And as we've heard, there have been reductions in the visa schemes for dependents and care workers. So I agree with Jake's analysis. I look forward to their plans to reform the social care system. It goes much more widely than that. We need to be investing in skills to get British workers to do the jobs that need doing. We need wages to continue to rise as they have in recent years. I don't believe that they're going to do it because I think their unions are wedded to the economy that we have and to the high migration model. On the small boats, I fear that Labour don't have a plan to deal with that. The only thing you can do to stop illegal migration is for anyone who's contemplating a trip to the beaches of the UK to know that they won't be allowed to stay. And Labour's position is that they will be allowed to stay until they've done some sort of clever deal with Europe, which won't happen. So unless we're prepared to detain and remove illegal migrants either back to their own country or to a safe third country, which is what the rest of the world is developing plans to do in emulation of our own Rwanda scheme, which has sadly not been allowed to happen, nothing is going to change on illegal migration, and I just have no faith that Labour will crack that problem.
I can sense Jake wants to come back on that, but we're running out of time. So I want to get in our final question from Vanessa in Trowbridge, who says mobile phones will be completely banned from Bob Dylan's UK tour this winter. The audience will be asked to hand their phones in when they arrive at the venues. God, can you imagine the logistics of that? Where else would benefit from being a phone-free environment apart from this very studio? Emma?
Public transport.
No.
Yes. If you have to.
What would I do on the
read the adverts?
24 minutes past 10 train?
Read the paper.
Oh my goodness.
It's the people who don't have headphones. It's not the phones. It's the headphones. That's the problem. Playing videos out loud drives me mad.
Emma, you'll never be invited back.
I'm so sorry.
Jake.
House of Commons chamber. We have lots of debates and everyone is staring at their phone. I'm guilty of it as well, by the way. But wouldn't it be good if we actually listened to one another?
An MP.
Me and Danny have agreed an awful lot. I didn't expect that at all.
An MP
just
admits being a hypocrite.
When it comes to using my phone in the House of Commons, I'm a hypocrite, but nothing else here.
Danny?
Yeah, it would be good to stop it in the chamber, stop people looking at tractors when they're not supposed to, that sort of thing. I'm afraid to say you wouldn't get as many MPs in there because a lot of them just sitting there doing their work while they're supposed to be listening to a debate, so it'd be even emptier. Just be aware of that danger. I would ban mobile phones from childhood. I would go the whole hog, as boarding schools are increasingly doing because they know the harm it does. I would ban mobile phones and social media for children under 12, 14, 16. Why not? Frankly, all parents know that it's an absolute disaster. It's the thief of childhood. And we need to be serious as the adults in our society, and families can't do it on their own. You can't just say parents can stop it if every other child is doing it. So this is an opportunity for collective action from the top-down centralised state control that Labour should believe in. Labour should do it and support parents by restricting this totally dangerous, ultimately, addictive object that we're all addicted to as adults. And the idea that we can protect our children from it in this free-for-all that we have is wrong.
Lizzie?
Pubs and cinemas, two places where I think there's funner stuff to be focused on, and it would be nicer if everyone was.
I must admit, I went to see a film recently and I could not resist looking at my phone at least 3 times during it. But I was sitting away from other people.
I would have been tapping on your shoulder. Excuse me.
I have had that happen once before and it did teach me a lesson. But promise not to do it again. Thank you all very much for joining us. Tomorrow's panel includes the Conservative peer and former Universities Minister Lord David Willits, the Sunday Telegraph's political editor Camilla Turner, the SDLP MP Claire Hanna, and the journalist, writer and former banker Oliver Cam. But coming up in the next hour, we are going to turn our attention to Labour's plans for boosting workers' rights, because according to a TUC poll, they're backed by voters across the political spectrum, including